Well, hi everyone, Sean Humphreys here. Welcome to this edition of the Take Charge of Change podcast. So in this edition, we're going to continue with our theme of looking at different aspects of the Resilient Professional ebook. We'll continue with a discussion on transition and change in an age of technology. And then we're going to go through and look at a very practical tool that you can use to currently assess your level of stress. That's a really critical thing. Stress isn't necessarily bad, but a lot of times people are sleepwalking through the level of stress they're experiencing. By becoming a little self-aware, we can enhance, our ability to navigate through stress much more effectively. You'll enjoy this edition of the podcast. So there's no denying, when we put together this post, we just put it together. We live in an age of transition and change, and of course that's true. It's incredibly true. In fact, at the beginning of this post, I talk about the fact that a single issue of the New York Times is about equal to what the average person would have seen information-wise for their entire life in the 17th century. In fact, that little bit of information is a little bit out of date, and it's just gotten way worse since that time. So there's no doubt there's just massive information overload that we're dealing with on a regular basis, and that has a subtle impact on our lives. You look at the information overload that we talk about here, but there's also the fact that in the midst of that information overload is a reality that there's just change going on all around us. And so we've talked about this in previous posts. There's macro changes economically, politically, environmentally, socially, financially, and then there's impacts in our own personal lives that we're navigating through. So more than any other time, I think at these transition points, it's very important that we take a pretty intentional approach to becoming as resilient as possible. So when we talk about resilience, the response to change really is, first of all, to be change capable, so building resiliency, and then secondly, to meet the challenge by staying effective and productive while we apply the skills of resilience and change hardiness to get through those changes. Now, for a lot of organizations, you might be an organizational leader, and one of the challenges is we are so busy in our roles and what we need to get done day to day that you can be very reactive to the impacts of change. Your staff come in, they work the very best they can, and at the same time that's happening, they've got lots going on in their personal lives. So the change, whether it's dealing with aging parents, teenagers, their own personal struggles, and then of course these macro changes I've talked about, can be very stressful for them. So you have employee assistance programs, group benefit programs that I think provide a very important role in this whole discussion. However, they're often reactive. They're responding to crisis points. So the whole idea of the Resilient Professional book and the content we'll go through is to try to get ahead of those events, to build in this resilience and change hardiness for your teams so they continue to be effective or don't get derailed for extended periods of time as they navigate through these changes. So I argue here that there's a need for a new set of skills. And the skills we'll talk about in future blog posts in a lot more detail. But when we talk about the impact of change, it really has this impact in many different areas, but one area, of course, is level of stress. Now, there's good stress and bad stress, and we talk about in the post how a lot of times our experience of stress is not necessarily the stressful event itself, but our response to stress. Again, if we're going through a lot of challenges and changes in our own personal lives, our response to a stressful event, what may be something that normally we could get through pretty effectively, might overwhelm us if we got all these other things going on, these transition points in our life. So to get you started on reflecting on this a little bit, I've got some information here on a really interesting tool that was put together in 1967. The psychiatrists Thomas Holmes and Richard Rott decided to study whether or not stress contributes to illness. And so they surveyed 5,000 medical students and asked them to say whether they had experienced any of the series, 43 life events in the previous 2 years. So trying to link up what was a person's experience through various life events for a 2-year period, and what was their health experience over that time period, and did we have a way of sort of connecting the dots between those two things. Well, lo and behold, they had done the study and they found that, yeah, in fact, there was a strong correlation between these events and a person's experience of health and wellness. And so the Holmes-Ross stress scale has been something that's been used for a number of years, and if many of you may be familiar with it, but a lot of people aren't. And so it's a good exercise to go through more than anything else to create some self-awareness about the stress that you're going through in your own personal life. So again, what happens is we get really busy with our days, our weeks, our months. We just get stuff done because we have to get it done, and we don't have time necessarily to think about ourselves. But what I'm encouraging you to do is to be reflective so that you can assess where you're at on that stress scale. And if you need to back off a little bit, that's a more productive strategy than just plowing through all the time and just having this break point. So some of you will go through this, and this is my action item for this block. I'd encourage you to go through it. So some of you will go through it and you go, you know what, I'm in pretty good shape here. I have a low to moderate stress. I don't have to worry too much about things. I've got, basic protocols to look after myself, and my current world isn't overly stressful. Some of you will go through it and you'll find that you're in a very stressful circumstance, and that should be a red light for you. That you want to back off the pedal a little bit. You want maybe to start looking after yourself so you can get through this stressful period and then back fully engaged. So rather than pushing all the time and having a crisis point, you can use this tool as just one of many different reflection exercises to point you in the right direction in terms of strategies going forward. A practical example around stress is you can have someone who gets a job promotion as an example, and normally that would be considered not a super stressful event. Yeah, that you might be anxious, might be a new role, but overall you're excited and you're anticipating this new opportunity. But if that new job came up in the midst of maybe your spouse is going through a tough time at work, maybe your teenager is going through a very difficult time and that's creating stress for the family, and then on top of that you have this job promotion, you might look at it completely in a different fashion. In fact, it might be a very stressful event for you because the timing isn't that great. So what I would encourage you to do is to go through it. There's a number of questions with point scores. We talk about how you can rate yourself on those scores, and then you can use that as a bit of a tool. So the question is, what was your score? And what can you do about it? So I've got a few comments about that. So if you are an organizational leader, if you've got staff working for you or with you, my challenge to you is, yes, you've got probably some great programs in your organization that help to fill in the gaps when the staff are going through tough times. But even better, try to get ahead of the curve a little bit to coach your staff to professional and personal resilience, change hardiness, so before they hit those events, that they're just better equipped to deal with them effectively. So if you're interested in having a conversation about customized workshops for your own organization, reach out to us. You can use the contact information at the bottom of this blog to start the conversation. You take care.